So my first question for you. So I thought what we would do is, rather than sort of repeat what she talks about, I thought we would try and apply it for you. So you could sort of take her concepts and go, well, what does this mean in terms of what I'm most interested in? So first thing, are you somebody who is in kind of bubble one, where you're thinking about making a change of some sort in your career? I'll ask you to do annotation in a second. So maybe it's a big career change you've got in mind, maybe it's a small one, but you are thinking about maybe doing something different to where you are today. Or maybe you're particularly interested in leadership. So you're thinking, I would like my first leadership role. I would like a bigger leadership role with more influence and impact. Maybe that feels like it's your priority. Or do you want to get better at how you are squiggling at the moment? So you kind of go, so this would be me now. So like I'm enjoying my squiggly career. I'm enjoying where I am. I don't want to make a change. I don't really want to do kind of a bigger leadership job, but I do want to get better at kind of where I am today. So let me know 1, 2, or 3, which is your priority right now. Annotation is view options, annotate, stamp, and then star. Looks like lots of you are already on the case with that. Though there has been some Zoom updates. We've had a few problems with that this week. So if it's not working for you, don't panic. Just let me know in the chat. Oh, Sam, you've got an interview next week for a role that would be a big increase in leadership. Sam, if you haven't listened to Rob Joffe, Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? That's what I would listen to before that interview, because I think he will ask you questions that will give you that ability to kind of go, this is why I will be good. This is why I am the right person for that role. This is what makes me distinctive and different as a leader. Good luck. I hope that's helpful. The fact you're here means you should definitely get that role. You're someone who's investing in your own learning and development. Thank you, Sarah, as well. Yeah, there's this, I've not seen this magic pencil. Apparently a pencil has appeared on Zoom, and I was like, I don't have this pencil. So I need to work this out. I need to work this tech out. Kate, I really like that book. It's quite an old book now. I just think it's a brilliant, propelling question. Why should anyone be led by you? I do think you should know the answer to that. I think leadership is accountability and responsibility. And yeah, he's really good actually in the interview. There's that article that Lottie's very kindly shared in the chat there. That article is quite a good way of getting to kind of the key points. I think the year that article came out in HBR, it was the most read HBR article, and it won kind of article of the year. So it had a really, really big impact. And it's really funny, like Rob isn't even that interested now in talking about it. I think perhaps he's moved past it, but I still think it's very relevant. Oh, you dropped it on your CTO's desk yesterday, Steve. I can't work out whether that's useful or slightly passive aggressive. You need to read this. I'm sure it was very much delivered in the spirit of being useful. Kate's also got interviews next week for a leadership role. Oh, exciting. Very, very topical. So just looking at the annotation on the screen at the moment, we've got a real mix. So I think actually one of the things with the Herminia episode, I wasn't sure whether we should call that leadership, because of course she does talk about leadership. Act like a leader, think like a leader. She also talks about your working identity and transitions, which is more career change. And generally, I think a lot of her research helps you just get better in your squiggly career. So I sort of had a real debate with myself, should we call the episode Outsight? But no one's going to know what that is. So anyway, we kind of went with leadership because I ran out of time to overthink it. But I do think it goes kind of beyond just thinking about being a leader. And interesting just to note where you are at the moment. So let's just clear those annotations. First point to make, which I think is a really important one, is this idea of possible selves. So wherever you are, whether you are thinking about career change, getting better at what you do today, or thinking about leadership, this is the idea of not being fixed about exactly what that looks like, kind of what the outcome looks like. And I was trying to think really practically, okay, I like the idea of being flexible, not fixed about our identity. How do I then do that? Like, what would that then look like? And I wondered if scenario planning was quite useful here, to sort of create some scenarios about your future possible selves, and then you can use those scenarios to take action. And one of the points that Herminia did say is often it's hard to take action if you don't know where you're going. But then she also, at the same time, encourages you to hold quite lightly where you are going. So I was like, okay, we've got to have something to work with here, because otherwise it's sort of hard to get to action in sort of an abstract sense. So wherever you are, so kind of pick the one that's relevant for you. And if you've got a pen and paper handy, you might just want to kind of write these down for yourself, or at least the start of a scenario. So let's imagine let's do the leadership one, because a few people were saying about leadership, just as an example. Scenario 1, I would encourage you to think about the easiest scenario. So if you were kind of going, what is the easiest way to sort of nudge myself closer to a role that has more influence and impact, a role that feels kind of like it has more kind of leadership as part of it? You might then be thinking, less so if you're going for an interview next week, because you obviously do have a bit of clarity, but more if you're generally thinking, I would like to have more leadership in my life. Like, what's the easiest way you could make that happen? And you could kind of write that scenario. So if I was thinking about this, I might say, if I was back in Sainsbury's, well, the easiest way to make that happen is to talk to my manager about deputising for them when they're on holiday. Or is there something I could lead on their behalf that would help them in terms of capacity? That's an easy scenario. It's not a new job. It's probably a relatively easy ask, or it certainly would have been for me, as long as you've got a good relationship with your manager. So what's an easy scenario, a kind of nudge scenario? Then think about, well, what would a really ambitious scenario look like? So maybe this is not only moving into more of a leadership role, but maybe it's moving into a leadership role that's outside of your area of expertise, scenario 2. So that's something I did. I moved from marketing to corporate responsibility to be head of that function. Never worked in it before, and actually really relied on my leadership skills, because that's essentially all I'd got to give. So what would an ambitious scenario look like? And again, I think you're making these up, but with kind of trying to be specific at the same time, knowing that it doesn't have to look like this, but you're just encouraging yourself to generate options and ideas. Next one, what's something that you've seen someone else do? And of course, we don't want to compare ourselves, but I do think sometimes it is really helpful to see how other people have navigated their squiggly careers and think, oh, okay, well, that person wasn't, if I was sticking with the leadership example, that person wasn't in a leadership role, but now they are. How did they make that happen? Like, what is it I can learn from other people who have done something similar to the thing that I would like to do? And you'll do it in your own way and in your own time and in your own space. But I still think kind of that kind of learning by looking around is helpful. Like, certainly I always find that helpful. I find that helpful now when I think about where might Amazing If go. I just look around and think, well, who's growing their business in a way that has impact and influence that I admire? So the reason I went to the How To Academy on Monday evening to listen to Salman Khan, who's the founder of the Khan Academy. And that's a perfect example of me going, okay, well, I mean, the Khan Academy is absolutely massive. The scale is quite different to where we are. But it has some similar philosophies, like making education accessible to everybody. They're actually much bigger outside of the UK. Pretty much like the UK is sort of obviously the market they've just not made that much of an impact in. They're massive in America, and they're massive in India, Brazil, loads of other places. He's really inspiring. And he's just written a book about AI. So that was me sort of learning from, kind of creating a scenario for myself by learning from someone else. And then the last one, what would get you halfway there? So again, this is just me trying to generate, like, how do I generate these ideas? I was thinking, well, what's like a halfway house? So maybe I'm not getting to move into a leadership role, or maybe I can't really take on any responsibilities from my manager. Maybe that just doesn't really work in my context. What would help me make a bit of progress? Maybe this is something outside of work. So maybe this is getting involved in a cause or a campaign that I'm interested in. Maybe it's volunteering for something. You know, you could definitely argue, and I think about kind of leadership. I think this is probably some of the hardest leadership. And I look at people who volunteer for things like the PTA at school, or who end up running all of the communications for the classes and those WhatsApp groups. I'm like, well, that is leadership in action. Like, definitely, I watch those people and just think, crikey, I couldn't do that job. You know, they get all the annoying questions and they have to distill loads of information. share it with everybody in a way that makes sense. You know, so that you'd be like, oh, okay, well, that's got me halfway there. It doesn't have to look like that. Maybe it's leading, I don't know, sports team. If you're coaching loads of 7-year-olds to play football, you have definitely got some leadership skills. Not least kind of how do you make them all listen to you? So that would be kind of like the slightly different. I guess you could have a scenario which you could call that one alternative. That might be a different way into a scenario, because what I've just described there, it definitely gets you some of the way there, but it's also an alternative way. It's an outside in way of looking at a scenario. So that could be another one. So you could call it kind of outside in as well. But this will get you generating those scenarios, because once you have those scenarios, you might already know those, or you might have been more in that position of thinking, I don't know what I don't know. You can then think about the action. And this is the kind of point about what got you here won't get you there. That kind of classic phrase I'm sure you've all heard before. And Herminia's point is what we tend to do is think we need to learn by reflecting. So almost prior to going into a leadership role or prior to making career change, we sort of feel like we need to have these real, these kind of deep moments of introspection where we sort of go away and immerse ourselves in kind of what leadership is and why we would be a good leader. And we look back to look forward. Her argument is much more useful to look forward, essentially. So she's going, actually, we need to learn by taking action, by sort of doing first, reflecting second, and actually thinking ahead to, based on those scenarios, what action can I take now? So I'm sort of putting myself in the position to pull that scenario towards me. We often talk about pull possibilities that are motivating to you towards you by having this create, not wait mindset. And I think over here, the challenge can be that we're sort of hoping maybe it's going to happen. You know, if we sort of think about it enough, we'll think our way into where we want to go, which I would love, because I love to think about things. Whereas here, we're talking actually, you act your way into where you want to go. Now, my dilemma here, and I don't know if any of you have this thought, is there is a bit of a challenge around, particularly maybe this is kind of leadership roles, being careful that you don't end up doing a job that you're not paid for. And I think that's probably at its most extreme. But I have seen that where sometimes you do feel like you're like, right, crikey, to get into the role that I want to do, these leadership roles, I'm essentially expected to do it first without being paid for it. And I think that is just a watch out thought, kind of worth mentioning it. I don't think I did ask it on the podcast. And I also think probably Herminia is being realistic about the reality, because like I said, I've seen that and I've probably done that. But there is also a bit of a, well, how long are you going to do that for? And also feeling like you are making choices. I think if you do this in the right way, you're very clear about you've decided. It's sort of not happening to you. You've made that decision. You've probably also decided, how long am I prepared to sort of overinvest in these? Because a lot of these things are extra. How long am I prepared to overinvest in these sort of extra activities, learning connections? Before then, I kind of really want to make something happen. And if it's not going to happen here, at that point, is it a tipping point to then start thinking about where else and what else? So that's just, it's just kind of in my mind. And this is the point about Outsight. Like we said, not a real word, but it's quite a good propelling word to get us to think a little bit differently about how we can be useful. And this really is about two things. It's about getting this kind of fresh external perspective from newness, so doing things you've not done before, and spending time with different people. This is, we did a podcast, didn't we, about, I think probably a couple of months ago now, you know, not getting stuck in your silo. I think this is that. So if you're always head down, if you're very in the kind of day to day, you're probably doing a lot of what you have done before on repeat, and you're probably spending time with a lot of the same people. And in any of those scenarios, getting better at what you do today, changing career and leadership, that will it will limit your learning. And it is hard to have a fresh external perspective if you are doing what you have done before. And these things don't just happen. Like, we know they take energy and effort. And actually, I did find it refreshing where Herminia did kind of talk about, she was like, well, what's the easiest thing? I like that. I'm like, what's the easiest thing? And actually, when we do things that we enjoy, and I think that's another really important kind of filter, easy and enjoyable, when it's enjoyable, it will give you energy. So then you don't mind doing it. And that has definitely been my experience. If you're doing this because you think you should, it's never going to be enjoyable. So you won't kind of have the energy. It will always feel like it's last on your list, or it just drains you rather than give you kind of the energy gain. So I think you're approaching this in the right way for you when actually you look forward to it. I had this week. I met somebody for the first time this week, and it definitely was a bit awkward initially because we'd been connected together, and there wasn't sort of a specific agenda. It was just a curious conversation. But I really remember thinking, oh, this is so nice because this has just sort of zoomed me out of my day to day. I've had a different kind of conversation. I've asked some new questions. I've got a new connection. So it's sort of new learning from a new person. And then we started to connect the dots sort of gently towards the end of the conversation about like, how could we be useful for each other? And so I always ask myself that question, like kind of when was the last time I've met someone I'd not met before? A few coach yourself questions for you this morning. Again, if you've got your pen and paper ready, I'd encourage you to kind of write these things down as we go through. So who could you reconnect with? If you have done any reading on strong and weak ties, strong ties support us, sponsor us, see us at our best, great for our confidence, great for our self-belief, and great for talking us up. They think we're brilliant. Weak ties know things that we don't know and know people that we don't know. And one way to spend time with weak ties is reconnect with people you've not talked to for a while, previous managers, previous colleagues, and it's often a bit easier than completely starting from scratch. If you're ever thinking, will it be a bit weird? To be honest, the majority of the time, I would say it's not. People are like, oh, it's so nice to hear from you. Yeah, it'd be great to catch up and have a chat a bit about like what we're both up to now. And if someone can't make it, absolutely fine, because there won't only be one person that you can reconnect with. So I think often the reason we don't do this is we might think, oh, but I've not spoken to them for 5 years. But nobody is kind of worried about that really, in my experience. Next one, a when question. I always like a when question because it encourages you to be really specific. When was the last time you met someone new? I do this quite frequently now in what I do, but I'm very intentional about it. If I think back to my Sainsbury's days, I definitely had a period in my career where I went from never meeting anyone new to really thinking, okay, how do I start to make this happen? I felt kind of in my bubble. And this can obviously be in your organization. So in Sainsbury's, there's loads of chances to meet someone new, like in the company, because it's so big. I'd be like, oh, look, I've not met anyone new from, I don't know, the trading team for a while. And they're always kind of really important to know and to learn things from. So this can be internal and external. Sometimes it's just how many internal people do you have? Now for us, this tends to be external because we don't have very many people, but certainly everywhere I've worked previously, a lot of this would have been internal because there was loads of people to talk to and to meet. Next one, what don't you know? And what could you do to learn that thing? So how could you learn kind of something new? This is the point about not getting stuck in a competency trap. It's interesting because there's a slight tension here, I think, with strengths. So of course, our strengths are what make us stand out and what make us distinctive and different. And it will be your strengths that will make you the leader that you want to be. And it will be your transferable talents in terms of your strengths that you'll take with you for career change. I think the point here is that sometimes we over rely on those and we don't spot what else we might need. I think that's the point about not getting stuck in a competency trap, is going, okay, well, I've got these things that I'm great at. What else would be useful? What don't I know? And how do what are those things that I then do need to learn that are going to be helpful for where I want to go? So I can think of some of these things. It's still my strengths that will make me good at what I do in Amazing If, but I definitely have a few specific things. I'm like, well, I don't know how to do this, and that would be helpful. And sometimes we sort of shy away from these because they feel hard. Obviously, you feel like a beginner, which always feels kind of more challenging. And then to be really specific, what's one project that you have that's outside of your day-to-day? So you might say, no, none. Like everything is very, very day-to-day. Maybe that's a good prompt to think, okay, could do with one thing. I often think this sort of expectation of kind of extra stuff can feel overwhelming, which is why I sort of put one. I honestly think just having one thing can be really motivating, can be really energizing. I was talking to somebody last night, and she does a lot of work for the Arsenal Foundation. Her two boys are very into football, and now she's much more into football now. She's doing this work for the Arsenal Foundation, and it's one thing, but she absolutely came to life when she was talking about it. It's like so passionate about it. She was talking about what she's learned, got really involved in it, and it's not a massive thing, and it's not how she spends most of her time, but you can just see how it's stretching her leadership skills in a different direction. She's learning loads. There's sort of a connection with her family, which she obviously really likes. That's obviously given her a kind of new way of getting involved in something that she probably wasn't that interested in before. So I think you only need one project, and that can be internal, that can be external. That I think ideally is something you are interested in and kind of passionate about, because again, this does feel a little bit extra, I think. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of building a bridge. This was my attempt at building a bridge this morning. And I think you can think about, for your company, if your company and team are over here, they're one side of the bridge, and this is you here, you can think about, what can I do to build a bridge to bring back to my team, to my company? What is interesting over here? Interesting for me and interesting for my organization. So my example, which is, it will never be a surprise to anybody here, was certainly when I was at Sainsbury's, I started to realize, I was like, oh, okay, I'm really interested in career development. So a lot of that stuff was kind of outside of Sainsbury's, but I would bring it back into my team, not to my company, because it wasn't my job, but I could bring it back into my team. I was also good at being curious in terms of kind of innovations around marketing. So this is like my like an area of expertise. So things that were different, things that were quite pioneering. I was always really interested in people who were doing kind of new things in new ways. Like I really remember going to see Burberry did a catwalk using holographs. And I remember coming back into Sainsbury's and being like, oh, I've been to watch this kind of talk at the V&A, all about how like Burberry are using holographs and like why they're doing that. And so I was always like fascinated by people who were just sort of, I don't know, just like trying stuff out. I think I was naturally curious about those things. And so again, that for me was something I could bring back to my team, and I could see that was valuable. So it's sort of interesting for you, but sort of valuable for your team and your organization. Let me know in chat any other ideas you've got. Thanks, Lucy. That bridge took me a surprising amount of time, given how basic it is. And there's about 3 versions that got scrubbed out first. Any other examples of things that you could kind of build a bridge to for your team or organization? So I've sort of gone here with an area of interest. It could be an area of expertise. But what else? What else could you kind of build a bridge to? I guess you've got, I did this more later in my career. I guess you've got connections. That's a sort of the obvious one. If you've got outside, if you've got outside networks and connections, you could build a bridge to those and bring those back. Lots of ways to use generative AI. Brilliant, Kate. I guess doing what we're doing today, you could take bits of this and bring that back into your team and your organization. Yeah, Andrew, you got there. I sort of, it bizarrely took me longer to get to that, but you could build, you could just share pod sheets. You could share a pod note. Interesting people that you follow on LinkedIn that you learn a lot from. Yeah, Emma, great example. You like exploring new techie tools. Great, Canva, Miro, bringing those back in. Field trips, that's a really good example. Ella, yeah, if you spend time being like, oh, maybe getting insight into your customers, into your competitors, like if you're like, oh, I'm always sort of interested in that. I used to do that actually. I'd forgotten until Ellie's just prompted me. In our Monday team meetings at Sainsbury's, I would go to different competitors and buy the same product, always something I wanted to eat in a team meeting, you know, like a cookie. So I would buy cookies from M&S, Aldi, Co-op, Sainsbury's, and we'd put them out and we'd do like a blind taste test. And I still love food. And I was like, this makes our team meetings like so fun. And we'd be guessing, oh, does that feel like it's M&S? Because, you know, it's all buttery and nice. And then, you'd be like, no, it's Aldi. And it was a very good reminder sometimes that the value of brands, because you're like, oh, M&S, it should be more expensive. But then sometimes they were better. So that was always interesting. And we weren't a food team. So we weren't in trading, we weren't in food. And I always wanted to keep people connected to like kind of what we were there to sell, what we were there to help people sell. The field trips is great, isn't it? It's such a good idea. And it gets it's a bit of energy and a bit of enthusiasm. And once I got started, then I just got everyone in the team to volunteer to do it. So it wasn't like I had to do that every single week. A biscuit selection subcommittee. That sounds absolutely incredible. We did Desert Island crisps at our last Squiggly staycation, and it prompts a lot of debate. But I feel like biscuit selection could be the next one after Desert Island crisps. That's good. I like that idea. Next week on the podcast, we are talking about micro moments of motivation. So not sort of motivation generally, but if you sort of need a motivational boost, like how can you make that happen very quickly, as in today, tomorrow? So if you're interested in that, that's what's coming next.